Okay, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today for this webinar. I am Lisa McKeag from the UMass Agriculture Program. Our topic today is enterprise. Yep, was that? Our topic today is enterprise budgeting. We'll sometimes call it crop budgeting. And we have three great presenters to cover the topic. So you should be able to see the agenda on the slide. And before we dig into it, I just want a little bit of housekeeping. So the webinar that we're doing right now is being recorded, and we will post it to our YouTube channel with a link on our UMass Vegetable Program channel, along with all of other videos and recorded events that we've done and have posted over the last few years. I will send out a link to everyone who was registered when the video is posted, along with any PDFs and links of things that we talk about today. So you should have everything. If not today, you'll have it afterwards. We'll send out links to everything. The presentation is in webinar format, so all the participants are muted and your cameras are turned off, but there is a Q&A function, so you should see that button at the bottom of your screen. You can put your questions and your comments in there, and we'll work on answering them as we go. We should also have time for questions and discussion at the end. So if there's things that from the Q&A that we haven't gotten to or that we want to talk about live, we'll answer them then, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute you then so you can speak up. One thing that I do want to note, the different slide here, one last thing. I just want to acknowledge that this program is being funded with support from the USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture through a grant from the Northeast Extension Risk Management Education Center. So thanks to them. And that's that. I think with that, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Vern Grubinger from UVM Extension. Vern is the vegetable and berry specialist at the University of Vermont, and today he's going to present on enterprise budgeting tools, how to use them, including some examples from some work he's been doing with growers in high tunnel tomatoes, and this cool new budget calculator and benchmarking tool that he's, I think, debuting here. Are you debuting this, Vern?
Yes.
Excited to see that. Okay, so I'm thrilled to have Vern here, and thank you, Vern, for presenting today. And I will stop my sharing if I can figure out how to do that. There we go.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. Glad to be here with you. Always love doing things with the awesome UMass Extension team that put together such great programming, and it's awesome to work together as a New England team, as we've been doing for many, many years to try and serve growers. So I'm going to share my screen here, and I am going to talk about enterprise budgeting and benchmarking for vegetable crops. Might take a second or two for that to load up. I'm not actually an economist. When I had a checkbook, I rarely made it balance, but tracking the numbers is important. I'm a production guy, but if we ignore the money part, obviously that is not good. So I'm going to run through a lot of things that aren't really great for a Zoom presentation because it's tons of numbers and hard to see, but everything I show will have a live link to where I got it, and then you'll be able to get that PDF distributed later so you can follow up. So just a quick overview of what are we talking about here. Enterprise budgets track all the money coming in and all the money going out so you can figure out how much you get to keep, which is your profit. And of course, the trick there is actually tracking everything if you're trying to get really granular about what is your net. There's a lot of budgets out there that are much coarser and just give you a general idea. And, it's a good place to start, and maybe that's all you need. But especially if you have a lot of investment in a single crop or a single tunnel, it becomes more important to know what are you actually making, in part so that you set a price that makes sense, right? So benchmarking is about comparing. You're comparing things in that budget, your crop data, either on your own farm against, hey, am I making more or less money with squash versus sweet corn, or this tunnel or that tunnel, or grafted tomatoes and not grafted tomatoes? Or it can be benchmarking among farms. Where do I stand with my peers? There's a whole bunch of people growing cherry tomatoes in tunnels. How much money are they spending? What is their price? How much are they making? So that is a really useful thing, because then if you're, especially under the average, you can start to look at what management activities might I change to get more net revenue? And guesstimating, also sometimes known as the vibe, hey, it feels like I'm doing good. I think we're making money, is not really a great way to make decisions. You can default to that on smaller crops and it won't hurt you, but major management decisions definitely want some data behind them. There's a bunch of budgets out there. You don't have to build these from scratch yourself. The things I look for are the downloadable, editable spreadsheets. So they've built the framework for you. Maybe there's some formulas in there and you can start to plug in your own numbers. I will say there's a lot of them out there that aren't that great because they're some of them are just so simple. Like if you have, one line for labor for growing a crop, it's not really helping you figure out, especially if you don't have those records all built and you're using estimates, you really want to go through it step by step and think, how much time does it take me to prepare the field and to lay the plastic and to put the drip in? So you build it without the records necessarily, but with your experience, you can still be pretty much in the ballpark. So I'm just going to share three sites that I found that have those downloadable tools and that they have a lot of different crops. So one of them is University of Kentucky. Obviously, you can't show the whole budget, but just get a sense of what's in variable crops. You can see all the inputs into the fertility and the pest control and some harvesting and marketing. And yeah, you just have your units. Is it acres? Is it hours? And you plug in what those costs are, multiply them out, and you get total. And here at the very bottom, they're looking at return over variable costs. Obviously, you have fixed costs too. And this isn't a particularly detailed budget, but you might want to go this way. And you can see all the crops that they've built these for. Um, some of them aren't that different, but some definitely are. You need very different budget setups for. University of Georgia has a lot of crops you can see on the right, and is kind of nice when they date them, just so you get a sense of how far off are the numbers that they started with it, how much you'll have to replace to keep up with increasing costs. And here you start to see a little more detail on some of the inputs. And some of these budgets include land costs, some include interest rates. So as long as you can add and subtract lines, you can build this to do what you want it to do. And again, the links are in here if you want to go get these things later. And then this is actually kind of incredible. These budgets from UMass are 25 years old and they are really good. All the numbers are off, obviously. You can see you can't get a hoe for $8 anymore, or what is that? Oh, that's hours per acre. Sorry. Probably still can't do that. The weeds grow faster now. But anyway, this is a comprehensive set of analytical sheets that go down all your costs, all your inputs, and then some charts that show you yields and prices and where your break even are. So you'd have to rebuild all these numbers, but it's kind of hard to find. But again, the links are there, and there's a whole bunch of crops that were built, and I still like this approach. So that's all budgeting. Then you get to the benchmarking, and there's actually very little data out there on benchmarking on vegetable farms. I can't find any that shows like budgets for a specific crop compared to other farms. But there was this cool study done by PASA, the Pennsylvania Sustaining Ag, and Western Mass was one of the partners in this. And we had Kristen Wilmer give a great talk at our annual meeting in January about the Massachusetts comparisons. There's a lot of data in here, a lot of tables, but for example, here's one where you're looking at net per acre. And they broke it down on farm size on the left, and then you can see the community, right? Interestingly, the median net is the same pretty much across farm sizes, well, between 2,000 and 3,000, but in the same ballpark. I would have thought that might have been somewhat different, but you can see the lowest 10%, the highest 10%. So where do you stand in your community as far as net per acre? And there's a lot of background in this report that tells you what these farms are like, and you can get a better sense of, is this representative of your community? So now I'm going to get into what I've been into recently, which is really focusing on high tunnels because they just keep increasing in number across the region. And some of that is protecting against weather, extending the growing seasons, improved quality, improved technology in these tunnels. But there's a lot of investment in them. And we did a bunch of studies. 2018, we worked with Extension in all the five New England states and sampled a lot of things in tunnels and learned a lot of things like, hey, you should probably have more than one or two drip lines per bed. And a lot of growers have since putting in three or four. And then we did this follow-up deep dive with 47 farms last year. So that's the basis for what we're doing now. So that was really a production benchmarking study. We got numbers on revenue and sales, but yeah, ventilation systems, irrigation, whether people, all kinds of mulches people were using, et cetera, et cetera. But as far as the money part, what we had was yield and price. And so you can see the range here. And I said 47 farms. It's interesting. A bunch of farms didn't have decent yield data. And then some farms like CSA farms said they didn't really feel like they could put a price on things. So the number dropped to 35. But the lowest gross per square foot was around $3. And you can see it's a little under a pound per square foot of yield at $3 a pound price. And the highest gross per square foot was 10 times that. And you can see the price is $6 a pound and getting 5.35 pounds. So what this doesn't tell you is who's making money, right? If it costs you $6 a pound to sell a tomato at $6 a pound, it doesn't matter how much you're grossing, like you're not making any money. So that's what this next phase is. And it's not to push people to these higher levels either, right? A small diversified farm growing 50 things in a tunnel and don't care about tomatoes that much, it's fine maybe not to get that much yield. But if you're specializing in tunnel tomatoes, you probably want high yields and decent prices, but also you got to keep your costs down enough so that it's worth it. So then you get into, well, what are we talking about as benchmarks? And there's just all ways to manipulate the data, and you got to decide what makes sense for you to look at. Obviously, net income per square foot, and we got to standardize this all right to square feet or 1,000 square feet or something, because some tunnels are 7,000 square feet and some are 1,500. The net revenue per pound of production, net revenue per labor hour, and I'll show you some more benchmarks later. Then there's just sort of more performance benchmarks, less so much on the money, but what is just the total yield? How much time are you putting in to get yield? What are the variable costs per area or per pound? So let's start with enterprise budgets. This is not benchmarking, just for high tunnel tomatoes. And there's a few online that are pretty good. Again, downloadable, editable. This one, just to run through, you can see they're starting with their wholesale and retail sales and their price units. So that's right. You can't do anything without knowing pounds and gross revenue, because those are going to be in all of your benchmarks that are related to various things of area and labor, etc. So here, for example, you start with soil test, $15. So right off the bat, I'm like, well, that's not true. I mean, the price might be right, but somebody's got to take that test. Somebody's got to mail it from the post office. I mean, those things actually cost more than the soil test, so that might be $50 or $60. So it's not a lot of money, but what happens is these things all start to add up as you go, right? All these things you aren't counting, and then you think you're making money, but why don't you have that in the bank? Well, because you omitted all of these true costs. And of course, some things are a lot more significant than that. So that's what I found interesting building these budgets, working with a few farmers, is each of them added things to the original budget. Well, what about this? Some farmers were, hey, I spend a lot of time taking the tomatoes from the tunnel to where I, sort them and pack them. And that labor needs to be counted. It wasn't aligned, so we put it in. And it goes on. Here, yeah, you have all this, fertilization and pest management. But where is that in the labor? There's no category for doing those things. So that's why I started building a more detailed budget. Here's one that's a little more granular. from Washington State. Again, you can download it and use it. And yeah, they're fine. I just wanted to get to two things. One, a really truer cost, and two, not making you mess with spreadsheets and invent formulas and do all that stuff. So that's why we created this online budget calculator and benchmarking tool. And thanks to the veg and berry growers in Vermont and the Agency of Ag, we got a Working Lands Enterprise grant to help us do this. And you too can use this at vvbga.org. So the catch is you have to join and become a member because your farm account will hold these budgets. They'll hold your drafts, they'll hold the reports of when you want to print them out and save them. It's $75 a year to join. We have a lot of out-of-state members. You can also join at any fee that you feel you can afford. So we have people join for zero, and that is fine. And there's a bunch of explanation here of how to use the tool. And obviously, we're still taking feedback as we figure it out. It's not open yet to the public. So this year, we're going to have some beta testers, and we do have some funding to pay folks, both in Vermont from that grant, and then the New England vegetable and berry growers, thankfully, gave us some funding to pay stipends to growers outside of Vermont to also do this. So we want people to really take the time this season collecting the data, making it as accurate as possible so that the benchmarking, when we sweep these together, will be useful. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So here's what it looks like when you hop on there. You got your calculator, and these are the major buckets that are going to have drop downs in them, the information about your tunnel, variable, fixed costs, yield, and revenue. And you can see down there, you can save them at any time. In this system, you can look at a report anytime. What have I entered? What does it look like? It spits it out. You can save it as a PDF if you want. Every time you hit enter with data, it saves automatically. So try and avoid losing things. So the first sections is crop and tunnel info. You select a value, right? It really should probably say select a crop, and that's what you get on the right. These are kind of the common tunnel crops. It doesn't matter when you're doing your budget for that. That is what the benchmarking will be based on, right? So this all goes into a database anonymously, and then we can select only cherry tomatoes and use that data to see what the community looks like, or only cucumbers. So that's not going to be something we do until pick a number, 10, 15, 20 farms are in there to have enough data. And you, when you do your budget, at the very end, you can push a button that say, I agree to submit my data for this purpose. Even though it's all anonymous, you have the option to say, I don't want you to use my stuff, and that's fine. So here, you select a crop, that's required. You can list your varieties if you want, it's optional. The name is for you to see your budget. You got to have your tunnel dimensions because that's giving us the square foot area to calculate things. And then if you only have half your crop, half your tunnel, or a third of your tunnel, or whatever it is, you enter the percent of that crop and it does the calculations for you. You enter the day you transplanted your tomatoes or you seeded your spinach and when you harvested, and it will calculate the days in the tunnel for you. And that's another benchmark, right? Is revenue per day of growth. Because basically, like you're paying rent to use this facility, you want to know how much you're making. The next section is your variable costs. And this is the longest section because it's a very detailed accounting of all the things you do. But again, going back to soil testing, you can see here, it's prompting you soil testing, lab fees, and postage. You put in a cost. So yeah, it's $17 in Vermont, but it costs $15 to mail it. So you put that number in. And then a person is collecting and mailing the samples. So there's hours. So you put that in. And it goes on, right? Compost, there's a cost per yard, what many yards. Fertilizers, we just put total costs. Didn't want to make this crazy to have so many lines of every listing all your fertilizers. So you do that online, offline, collect your total fertilizer costs. And there's a bunch of categories like this where it just says total cost and you put that in. But then there's a number of hours to spread these materials before you amend them. So this goes on from taking care of your transplants or seedings, laying the mulches, setting up your irrigation, maintaining your heating and ventilation systems. And everything is auto-populated with zero unless you change it. So then when you go to your report, the zeros just show up as red to remind you, did you intend to not enter anything? But like transplants and seeding, for example, if you buy transplants in, your seeding costs and all that remain zero because you bought transplants, or the other way around, your transplants are zero, you have all the seeding costs. And then in the end, this totals up your all your variable costs. Then you have fixed costs. So you could decide you don't want to do this, right? You're just interested in your variable costs, and that would be your option. And this is something that's not under your control usually as much as variable costs as far as management, unless you're leasing land or something. But it is important when you get to pricing. This was brought up in a talk I gave, and then a business advisor was there saying one of the really important reasons to make sure you put fixed costs in here is if you're using this tool to set your prices and you're ignoring your fixed costs, you aren't going to recover all your costs. So, even if you have to guesstimate, put those in. And this is your physical plant. So we've made it simple. You put in your tunnel structure and it amortizes it over 20 years for you. And 10 years for irrigation, 10 years for heating. Just pick some numbers to make it a little bit simpler because it's a lot of work to put this stuff in. And then you get to your property costs, your taxes, your insurance, your permits, the things that you're going to pay for whether you grow anything or not. That's what the fixed costs are. Then we get to yield and revenue. So what are your sales in these three categories? Retail, wholesale, or seconds, and your price, and it calculates for you your revenue and your total yield for both of these. And this is obviously critical for the benchmarks. If you don't fill these in and you go to your report, you get a lot of error messages of like, cannot calculate such and such. So then we get to the fun part, which is the benchmark. So now it's taking all that data and doing this for you to figure out what are your variable costs per square foot, your fixed costs, and your revenue. What's the yield per square foot? Yeah, it goes on and on. It shows you your total hours and wages. And then you can get into, I like this one in particular, labor minutes per pound of yield. So how many minutes of a person does it take to make a pound of tomatoes or spinach? And yeah, what's your net revenue per day of growth in that tunnel? So that's kind of interesting, right? But where it really gets interesting is looking at where you stand with other farms. So before we built this tool, we just used spreadsheets, and I had 8 growers enter their data. This was for high tunnel slicing tomatoes, and you can see the range. Some are heated, they're unheated, they're 2,000 square feet, they're 7,000. But again, you break it all down to the marketable yield, went from 1.8 pounds to 5 pounds per square feet, and you can see the average is 2.25. So then where do I stand? And on all the way to the right in yellow, you can see the net revenue really varied a lot, right? From $1.50 to 15.67. And the 15.67 is going to have, good prices and good yields and probably some very efficient labor practices, which definitely showed up. And you can see the averages, all these in the bottom. And yeah, that $15 net, which do you think they're high or low in labor minutes per pound? They were way low, right?
Whoa.
Less than a minute of labor per pound. So this is where I start to get really excited, right? If we can go back and unpack what is that farm doing differently? So sometimes, again, this is all going to be anonymous, but I know some of these folks, and I happen to know that farm, and they have great systems. So how can we document? Hey, here's the pruning. Like if you looked at even on the right there, hours to pick and sort go from 18 to 73. This is standard, right, per 1,000 square feet. Now, there may be some operator error in this first swipe of entering the data. Maybe they made errors, but if they didn't, somebody's got a really efficient system and somebody's probably pretty inefficient. And what is the difference? So there's a bunch of learning that can go on for management beyond just seeing what the numbers are. So we welcome people to join. We'll get this dialed in early this spring. We'll have the beta testers this year to really make sure it works, and then join the VBBJ. The big thing you can do this year is collect good data. And this is the weakness of this whole system, right? If you don't have harvest logs, you are going to be totally guessing on your yield or extrapolating from sales, which probably should work, but ideally there's some measure. And the good news is you don't have to measure everything every time, right? Once you know kind of what your yield is on one row, and you can extrapolate to the rest of the tunnel or even next year if the production looks the same. So we're going to have these tools available. Labor is probably the trickiest one, and the good growers I work with that have a handle on that tell their employees this is just part of your job. We have systems, whether it's clipboards or software or something, like you need to be tracking your time. And again, not over and over and over, but at least one time through to know what does it take to pick all the tomatoes off of a 10-foot tall high tunnel plant. So that's my story, and I hope that this tool will be helpful to a lot of growers. And I welcome your questions via email, and you'll have this data from Sue. Thanks a lot.
Wonderful. Thank you so much,
And
Vern. That was great. And for folks, I did manage to grab the links for the budgeting tools that you had shared at the beginning. I dropped those in the chat, but I missed the links for the benchmarking tools and for the link to the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Association. But like I said, we'll share the PowerPoint of Vern's slides and make sure that you have all those links. We did have one, so we have a couple questions. One that I think I'll just have you answer quickly now, Vern, which was when you're talking about all of your examples, I'm not sure when this question came in, and Lily, if you want to clarify, but they asked, are these all organic, all conventional, or a mix? And
good question. The requirements for participation in the study that we just did was in-ground production, trellised, drip irrigated in a plastic hoop house. So there was no organic or conventional required. Most of the participants were either organic or organically inclined. But yeah, when you look through most of the practices, yeah, I would not say like you have to be organic to find those numbers useful. I mean, if you're in a very different system like hydroponic, that's where I think I would not benchmark against, in-ground production.
yeah, that makes sense. There are other things coming in, and someone had a good question about just generally for the audience, I think, what folks are doing about fuel costs, but I think we'll save all this stuff for the discussion period at the end, and I'll let Jim go ahead and start his portion.
I'll just
Yeah,
real quick say I did have one of the growers say to me that I'm already going to use this tool because I had things dialed in with this budget, but now I have to look at if I enter X increase in fuel costs, what does that do to everything else? And it's going to help me with pricing.
yeah, it's a good question and important when these things are really dynamic like they are now. Okay, thank you so much, Vern. That was fantastic, and that was really cool to see your tool. And I look forward to sharing the link to the association with folks so that they can join up and use it. Okay, so Jim Ward. Jim is the owner and operator of Ward's Berry Farm. Many of you may already know him. The farm is spread across 175 acres in Sharon, Massachusetts, and does a little or really a lot of everything. Including retail at the farm store, wholesale, pick your own, farm-based events. And yeah, Jim has just been a fantastic resource for us here at Extension. I've learned a lot from Jim over the years, and as have many other growers in the region. And I thank you for generously sharing your time and your knowledge with us. And I'll give a shout out also that you're a very active member of the New England Vegetable and Berry Growers Association, which is another trade organization that folks can be a part of here. And Jim was enthusiastic about this topic, and I'm really grateful that he wanted to talk about it with you. So he's going to share some examples from his farm about how he uses crop budget. So take it away, Jim. Thank you.
Okay. Well, first of all, I have UMass Extension to thank for introducing this crop budgeting way back. I did a lot of it with Ruth Hazard. Probably 30 years ago, we were working on it, and some of those original numbers of how much it costs to harrow a field, I think I might have shared some of that with Ruth way back when. So I've been doing it. I don't have a lot of documents to share today, but I do have notes that I'll get to Lisa and you guys can see later. But I'm going to share some anecdotes about how I use the crop budgeting. And first of all, it is a little bit of a exercise to initially to create a crop budget. I used these templates like Vern just showed initially, and I definitely found that the coarse ones that don't have as many line items are not very useful or not as useful. I like to be pretty detailed about every process in our costs that we're encountering. But I use these these expense numbers just to decide how I want to market and how I want to price our products, and that's what I think where it really has had a big impact. So I'll use an anecdote. So first of all, when I'm creating, I don't want to spend days and days on each of these crop budgets, but I want to have a useful number. So I drill down to be very precise on a line item when it's easy to do, and when it's not, I'll when I'm trying to put a price for primary tillage, I'm going to use a seat of the pants estimate, and I'll say it takes 20 minutes for that chisel plow to go across an acre. My driver and tool are worth $120 an hour, and I'll extrapolate and get my numbers that way. That my number in that case, I'm including fuel, and maybe I have to I may need to update these numbers because of the price of fuel now, but I've slowly increased my estimate of what a large tillage tool and tractor and operator cost me. I've been increasing those numbers over the years, and I think that's important to do, but I think that you can use a seat of the pants estimate for some of these items, but as long as you include each of these items, as Vern was pointing out, the number becomes useful only in that when you've done that. I really think one of the things that some growers do that may hurt them is overestimating their yields. So I know that when I talk to corn growers, I have a good friend that is an amazing corn grower, and he gets 250 bags of sweet corn an acre. Well, I know I don't, and I know that when I get a good yield, I also often walk past a quarter of an acre that I couldn't pick and market because it all came in at once, or half an acre. I have bird damage that's becoming a real problem the last 5 or 10 years, and that is cutting into my yields a lot. So I think it's important that we all, when you're calculating your yields, you don't try to fool yourself, because there's no benefit to that. Try to be realistic and accurate about what your yields are. We now have very good sales data that my team has been gathering the last 5 years or so, and so I can be real accurate about my sales of my crops, so I can then go back and be sure about my yields. But again, I would say, it doesn't do you any good to base your revenue numbers on your best yield ever. That's not something that's going to serve you well. Before I share a couple anecdotes, a few important things about, or a few things I've noticed about these crop budgeting templates is that when I get to primary tillage and tillage, cultivation, I'm always surprised how little those cost per acre, even though it's important to keep them on there. And then I always end up noticing that I've spent so much more money on harvest and packing and marketing and distribution than I thought. So those end up being the bigger line items for me. And I'll talk about how a little bit about how those that has affected some decision making that we do. We let's see. I have a few other things here. I really liked the comment that Vern made about explaining to your employees why justifying to your employees that you need to keep track of how long it takes to harvest something or to do any task. I try to make that an early discussion within the first few days of when I'm training someone. When I'm training them, I first try to train them about for harvest, for example, the quality of the product that they need to pick, and the way the container should look when it's full, or what the bunch should look like when it's been harvested. I think those are the first things you start with. Then I start to talk about efficiency and using two hands, for example. But all the while, I'm emphasizing that I need to know how long it takes to pick a quart of strawberries. And I don't expect you to be as fast as our best pickers on day one, but you have to be cognizant of the fact that I need to know that you're harvesting at a clip at which I can then make money after I've sold it. And it can't cost me more for you to harvest it than it does, than I get for when I've sold it. So I think that that's an important thing and it's definitely shouldn't be insulting to someone as you're training a new employee. You should be challenging them to understand that, you're trying to make money, and also that they can affect it by being more efficient. And so I think that that's a useful early tool when training someone. But so now I have a little example of sweet corn. We used to grow, as an anecdote, we used to grow about 55 acres of sweet corn that we would do primarily wholesale, and a good amount of it retail, but more wholesale than retail. And that's one of the first crops that I budgeted way back when, and started figuring out what it cost me to produce. And this is where I noticed, my tillage costs don't really add up to that much. My harvest costs, I thought we were pretty reasonable. We were hand harvesting, but I noticed that I did it again this morning. This morning, my total expenses for an acre of corn, I came up with $3,980. That should be probably. I don't think in this one I need to probably put fixed costs in there better, and so it's probably a little bit higher than that. If we were still selling corn, I've watched that number grow. That number is close to double what it was the first time I did it. But when that first time I did it, the wholesale price of corn was between $8 and $12 a bag. And I just didn't, with my yield data, I could see that at the end of a lot of effort, 55 acres of growing and grinding and selling, and every bag you put on the dock, handling it, you're handling it a few times, delivering them, there wasn't enough being made at that price. And we started to try to raise our wholesale price, but there was enough corn being produced around me and sold at $12 a bag that there was a lot of pushback, and people were not ready to pay more than that for corn because so much was, and I was scratching my head about I, why other people were selling it at that price. So basically, we stopped growing. We grow only now 25 to 30 acres of sweet corn, and that's mostly sold through my store. And our wholesale price is now $32 a bag. And at that price, at $32 a bag at the wholesale, my revenue, and I estimated 175 bags for my yield. I know I can get more than that sometimes, but that includes the acreage that I walk past or the birds eat. And I can gross $5,950, so $6,000. So I can do okay. It's still not great. And if I charged less than that per bag, I could be negative. If you went back to just 5 years ago, the price was $16 or $18 a bag in my area. And it's only been in the last 2 or 3 years that price has jumped up into the high 20s and $30. So that's just an example of where, if you're not paying attention, and if it's tradition, we're sort of a first generation farm, so I didn't have the tradition that some of these other growers around me, the generations had been growing sweet corn for years, and they were used to these wholesale prices. They may not have been pushing their numbers around as much as I was, and they became comfortable with those prices, and maybe they found maybe it took a little longer to find they weren't making money. And now, fortunately, the prices have raised. But now that we can sell it at a higher price, I could consider growing a little more sweet corn, but we've moved on because I see that I can make more money on other crops. But that's an example of the decision making that sweet corn we've gone through, and it also affected our wholesale price. I mean, our retail price as well. We get over $1 in a year now, or at least $1 in a year every year, and that is relative to the wholesale value. Let's see. I had another example of in peaches that was a frustrating one. In both peaches and tomatoes, we get yields that I think are good, and especially if you consider all the pounds we harvest. But another thing that's important is make sure that you're keeping track of, not just the pounds that you harvest, but the pounds or boxes of number one fruit, your shrink. So tomatoes and peaches, I had a fair amount of shrink coming off my packing line. And with peaches, the wholesale price when I started getting into peaches was around $20 a box, $18, $20 a box. And I was happy to have them for my retail. But after I watched us really spend a lot of money repacking what the guys had harvested and then discarding some and not having an outlet for those seconds, we made a difficult decision that we needed to try to market them a different way to get more money. And we transitioned to pick your own, which every farmer on my farm and every other farmer I've talked to said, you should never do pick your own for peaches. And there's good reason they say that, because damage is done in the field. The trees are hurt. There's waste. People eat them. But we knew we were, our opinion about pick your own is we're selling an experience, and we charge for it. We make sure the price is high, and it can accommodate that shrink that happens in the field. And now I don't have the labor of harvesting. I do have the labor, and by the way, I found it well worth putting more attendants in the field so that I have people to oversee the pick your owners. And if I get the right attendant with a positive attitude that really is a good trainer and can go and talk to them and make the customer understand that not to be wasteful and what a ripe peach looks like. We've done so much better with pick your own. And yes, we lose some big branches that get broken by a kid climbing the tree. But if we kind of deal with those in the winter when we're pruning, and we now don't wholesale any of our own peaches because between we do okay retail and we can do much better with pick your own. And I credit the crop budgeting with helping me make that transition. And it was like I said, it was resisted by all the farmer. My 2 or 3 key guys that do all the peach growing were really mad when we started, but I think they've seen the light, and now that's how we sell most of our peaches. Let's see, I have a couple more little. The blueberries have a similar. There's some similarities. In the case of blueberries, they're one of these crops. When I'm deciding to grow a crop, I try to run through the crop budget. Sometimes if I haven't grown it before, I'm not doing a complete and accurate budget. But in the case of blueberries, we've been growing them for 45 years, and I know what it takes to on the production end to get to the harvest point, and then it's keeping track of that expense of harvest. Blueberry, the biggest expense by far is harvest, and it's a small little berry. It takes a long time to fill a container. So then you're when you're focusing on that, you learn to price at pricing high so that you can make some money. But I also have noticed that if the places where I'm not doing pick your own and I want only my crew to harvest, we can make pruning decisions that affect that harvest time. So I can make pruning decisions in the winter or the early spring where we're cutting more canes out and really opening up the plant and spending a bit more time pruning, and then increase fruit size and lower harvest cost. So we can lower the cost of harvest by changing our pruning techniques. And if harvest is the highest line item on your budget, then that I think is one thing you can do to affect to bring your expenses down. And let's see, I've got a few other. We've got sorry guys. Yeah, I've found that another farmers before before we had such a good handle on our harvest data, I was doing a lot of seat of the pants estimating, and I would use the UMass Vegetable Management Guide which has a chart for yield data. So if you're not if you've never grown a crop before and you don't have the data, that was where I would start with to look for average yields on that chart in the Vegetable Management Guide. So that was useful to me, and I would always assume that I was on the low end, just because if you overestimate again, you can find yourself deciding to grow a lot of a crop that you and then not make money on it if you're not being realistic. You also have to consider. So here I've told you some examples of where I've changed our marketing strategy. I do understand that I have an advantageous setting where I have very good retail demand. I have a real good pick your own demand as well. And we're sitting pretty close to Boston and Providence, so I can also tap into wholesale markets. But if you're in a different setting and you have fewer choices, you've got to you have this it's even more important to have a really accurate crop budget. So know what it costs, know what it costs, your real cost for labor per hour. If you pay, $16 or $17 an hour to someone to harvest, which by the way, we don't anymore, that number is much higher. You still have the rest of, there's a lot more costs to employing someone than that. So you have, it might be I'm using $25 an hour now as when I'm budgeting. So any task, that's the low price the low labor rate that I use on our budgets. And then I'm using a much higher rate for tractor operators and so forth. Let's see. I mean, that's most of what I have right now, but I'm happy
to. For you, Jim, if you want.
Sure.
So that was great, and definitely if folks have other questions for Jim's, put them in the chat. Or I suppose you can raise your hand too, and we can figure out how to unmute you if you want to speak up out loud. But Lily Israel was asking, how are you doing your tracking? She says, do you track every crop every year? Or some crops some years? Is the labor tracking on paper or is it digital? And are employees tracking everything they do? So lots of sub questions to the general.
Well, that's I have a general manager, Ryan, here, who loves to track things and keep spreadsheets, using spreadsheets all day. He does, and so we do track a lot. We have really good, like I said, great sales data and good. We keep good track of our labor data. Of course, that's all on the computer, easy to pull out. We don't have, we don't spend a real lot of time separating out what each person is doing, like how many hours per day that they spend harvesting tomatoes versus weeding and so on. But we do know, I guess the when we break down the labor, that's more, and we put it in a crop budget, it's more seat of the pants kind of estimating how long, this morning when I was trying to figure out the corn budget, I estimated that we hand weed corn usually once quickly, and I just put in numbers that I thought it would take, 6 guys 4 hours to hand weed an acre. And that's an example of just estimating. But so we don't break it down that well, but we do have a very good breakdown of our sales data. I don't know if that fully answers your question, but I also try to be cognizant of what everybody's doing all the time. And so, if it's taking 3 days to weed a field of pumpkins, we often will, or whatever it is, we'll go back. I'll at some point, if I notice that it took this big crew a long time to move a short distance, then I might say, let's harrow that in, because I'll never recover the cost of weeding that whole field. And so we've done that, had to make that we make that decision a couple times this season. Hopefully it's on small acreage where it's like a carrot planting or something that's only a quarter of an acre, but but we're keeping track of how long it takes people to do things.
There was another question, Jim, about how you track your sales.
Well, let's see. I mean, we have spreadsheets. We use Blue Cart for our wholesale, that software, and we have Fair Harbors that we're using for our events. That's another software program. We use Toast, and if I go any farther, then I'm going to quickly divulge how little I know about any of those and how to run them. But there's someone in our operation entering data into those software platforms all day, and especially the blue cart that we use for wholesale. That is the software we use, and that's how I can ask Ryan how many pounds of, like this morning we asked him how many pounds of pick your own carrots. My farmers don't want to do pick your own carrots anymore, but Ryan, my general manager, insists that we do pick your own carrots, and he can tell you why, because of how many, it was whatever $9,000 worth of pick your own carrots that we did last year, and it was out of a little small piece. And he would say, the farmer says, no, I don't want to grow those, because when we drive by, we see people breaking off the tops and we see waste. But because we have good sales data, we can make that decision.
That's great. And a similar question, the last one that came in for your talk, Jim, do you have a spreadsheet you can share that you use for labor tracking, or maybe more generally, any suggestions around that?
I can, I wish I could share with you guys there's a document that is that accumulates on the dashboard of the pickup truck, that one of the Jamaican guys takes the harvest list that we give him every morning, and he sticks it on the dashboard, and at the end of the year I crack up, because it's this, it's a big stack of harvest lists that he has. That's the closest thing we have to a real breakdown of the what these guys did all summer. Our payroll numbers can tell you, how many hours every person, all the numbers about hours spent to produce and harvest. But the breakdown, I think, is more organic, or more, it's not tallied that carefully.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing all that. That just, you have much experience. You're clearly paying attention to all of the details that are happening on your farm, and really interesting to hear about that. And if folks have other questions, Vern also answered some of the questions in the Q&A from his talk. And if folks have questions or comments, you can continue to put those in there, and we'll get to those things at the end. We also got a great talk, Jim, in our comments. So great talk. Okay, I am going to move on to the final presenter, who is Bailey Albert. Bailey is the State Outreach Coordinator for the USDA's Farm Service Agency in Massachusetts, and also a really helpful resource for growers who are looking to take advantage of FSA programs. And I asked Bailey to speak today about the NAP, or the Non-Insured Crop Disaster Assistance Program. I think I got that right. And the buy-up coverage level options that you can get with it. The thinking being that sort of one area of decision making for your farm might be whether and how to protect your crops with NAP or other whole farm programs that might be offered through the risk management agency. And so the decision about whether to purchase additional coverage with a buy-up option, or which crops to include in your NAP or your crop insurance policy, would likely benefit from some analysis about how much it costs you to actually produce a crop, and what a crop loss would mean for your farm financially. So that was sort of the thinking about having this be part of the conversation. And that's it. The floor is yours, Bailey, if you want to share your screen, if you have slides.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you for that introduction. And thanks to the great speakers before me. I have a tough act to follow there. Okay, Thank you. All right. Thanks, everybody. My name is Bailey Albert. I am the State Outreach Coordinator for Massachusetts Farm Service Agency. I'm also the County Executive Director in Franklin County. So if I have any Franklin County farmers on here, looking forward to chatting with you at some point. The reason that I say that is because I'm going to speak really quickly to what Farm Service Agency is and why the county office system is helpful to you. And then we're going to dive into why what I have to say is relevant to the talk today, like Lisa said. So as we get going, basics on Farm Service Agency, FSA. We're the federal government. We use all the alphabet soup acronyms that we can find. So I'm going to say FSA for Farm Service Agency and just give you a quick outline there. Farm Service Agency is responsible for administering any programs and policies that come along from Congress directly to our producers. So if they write something in the Farm Bill, or if an emergency program comes along and there needs to be usually financial assistance out to farmers, that would come from your Farm Service Agency office. We are two halves of a whole. We have what's called the farm programs, where we do that financial sort of assistance. We've got permanently established programs. We have programs that come along in response to disasters like a global pandemic or crazy flooding or, a unseasonable hailstorm, that kind of thing. And we also keep track of eligibility paperwork for a lot of our USDA programs. Our other half is farm loans. We are a lender of first opportunity for those who are unable to secure credit elsewhere. The reason that I mentioned that is as you're doing your budgeting, you might find that your cash flow doesn't go all the way for what you need. And if you're not able to get a loan from the bank down the street, think of your local Farm Service Agency. We can do ownership loans on real estate or operating loans from anything from feed, seed, labor costs for the year. They can have different term lengths, and the interest rate is pretty competitive right now. So that's my outreach plug there. Farm Service Agency, FSA, works on a county office system in all of our states. In Massachusetts, we've got 7 offices across the county, and I will share a little quick locator so you can find out where your service center is located. In most county offices, you'll find that there's a Farm Service Agency and an NRCS, a Natural Resources Conservation Service, co-located, and you might have business with both of us. I had a little asterisk when I talked about ad hoc disaster assistance programs. There's currently a program going on for specialty crop farmers, which I think a lot of you will be. And I just want to have awareness on that. If we have a teeny bit of time, Lisa, at the end, I'll do a plug. But if anything, I just wanted to pique some interest and have folks call their county office if you're not already aware that this program is going on for specialty crop growers. Very quickly, Farm Service Agency walks you through the process of getting established with a farm number for USDA purposes. We get your address and draw it up in our map, and that's where we have the data for what you grow on your land. Or if you wanted to do a project with NRCS and get an irrigation support or a high tunnel or something, you have to have those records with us. With all things USDA, we have a lot of forms. Some forms you have to fill out every year if you're working with us. Some forms come on a, one and done unless you've made a change. And then the other thing that I'm highlighting because it's relevant to NAP and record keeping is acreage reporting. Usually by July 15th, for most of you on this call, we ask you to report the crops that you've planted and where and how much you've planted them. That's how we get it on record, and we're able to help you with programs such as NAP. Which leads me to the purpose of why I am here today, and Lisa invited me to talk about the Non-Insured Crop Disaster Assistance Program. That's a mouthful, so our acronym there is NAP, and the way that it's framed in all of our regulation is that NAP is supposed to provide financial assistance to producers of non-insurable crops to protect against natural disasters that result in lower yields or crop losses or prevent crop planting. What that means in basic layman terms is that if your crops are not covered by a commercial crop insurance agent or, federal risk management agency coverage, like we see on corn and soybeans and tobacco and, potatoes, if that's not one of those crops. Those are the non-insurable crops, like your strawberries and your carrots that Jim was talking about, and all of those specialty fruit and veg crops. So NAP works on those, and NAP can support you on a complete crop loss or even on a lower yield loss year. So I do like to mention that up front. When we talk about NAP and budgeting, what I was thinking when Lisa asked me if I was interested in being a part of this presentation was, I want to obviously tie it in to the crop budgeting and the enterprise budgeting that you're thinking of, but I thought a lot of it would be useful if you had a basic understanding of the way NAP worked and you could understand if that would be worth your time. So there's two pieces to thinking about the budgeting with NAP. There is a cost sometimes to secure NAP, and there is the payout that NAP can give you on the other end. So when you're budgeting for your crops, you think about, if you had a crop loss, how much would that impact you? Would you be able to absorb that loss? Would crop insurance or some sort of safety net feature be worthwhile on your budgeting scale? So to obtain NAP coverage, NAP is similar to an insurance program in that you secure your coverage ahead of time. You buy your car insurance first, and then you have a car accident later. Hopefully not, but the same idea. You buy your crop insurance first, and then there might be a flood later in the year. There's a service fee to obtain coverage. That's $325 per crop, up to a cap of $825. So whether you insure 3 crops with us or 30 crops with us, your cap for that service fee is going to be $325. And that's just kind of think of it as the administrative fee of coming in. We do your paperwork, we get you signed up. That's your fee. You have basic coverage with NAP. If you are a beginning farmer, farming for 0 to 10 years, a limited resource farmer, which has a certain calculation percentage based on the county income level, a socially disadvantaged farmer, which is a female farmer or a farmer of racial or ethnic minority, and a veteran farmer with certain considerations there, this basic fee can be waived. So you can get completely free, basic, catastrophic level NAP coverage. That's really great. That means when you're putting it into your budget, it costs $0. So it's probably too good to pass up, just as a safety net. Lisa mentioned that we have buy-up coverage options. So your basic coverage level, catastrophic level, means it goes really poorly, and this is your basic level there. That's called 50-55, and I'll talk about what this means. Buy-up coverage, you can buy up to 50, 55, 60, 65 at 100%. So we'll talk about that. And there is a premium required if you do buy-up. So bear with me. I forgot that I put this in there just so you could see. There is a form where you can self-certify to being one of those historically underserved groups, and that's what secures you that waived service fee. So just be aware that you do have a form, of course. All right, if we're talking about the coverage levels that I mentioned, for basic coverage, the ratio 50-55, that beginning of the fraction is the percent of the total crop that's going to be covered by NAP. And the second half of the equation is the percent of the average market price that you'd be paid on for the crop. So in plain English, if you do basic coverage, NAP is going to cover 50% of your crop. So in other words, a producer has to lose over 50% of their crop for NAP to kick in, or you can think of it like you absorb the first 50% of the loss and then NAP covers the rest. Basic level, you're going to be paid out at 55% of our average market price. So my example here is you have basic coverage. You lose 75% of your crop. You lose 3/4 of your carrots this year. NAP is going to kick in after that first 50%. It'll cover 25% at 55% of our market price. If you buy up, you can buy up, to 55, 100. The 100 means you're going to be paid at 100% of the average market price that we have on our payments. That's an average that comes from statistical agricultural data. As you go up from 50 to 55 to 60 to 65, the amount of the loss that NAP covers increases. So I put it on this screen, if you can think about it, at 50%, you have to lose 50% before it kicks in. Or you can think of it, NAP will cover 50%. At 55, you have to lose 45%. At 65, you have to lose 35%. Or you can think of it, your low yield losses must exceed. So you have to lose over 35% for the highest coverage level to kick in. And this all seems jargony and crazy. It's easier to talk about if we are talking on a specific crop. But the reason that I put it out there is so that you can consider what the different levels mean to you when you're doing your budgeting. My considerations that I have here for NAP buy-up is, I'm going to go backwards. There is an extra cost for the premium. When you buy up, you have a premium that you pay. A historically underserved farmer pays 50% of that premium. So again, with that form, you are given 50% off on the premium. But it's a cost you have to budget in. The way I talk to my producers about buy-up coverage is it can be really useful if you have 1, 2, or 3, really major cash crops that if your bottom line would be severely impacted if you had a crop loss there. That can be a good way to dip your feet into the water of doing buy-up coverage. If you know your tomatoes are what you have to hang your hat on every year, and if you lost your tomatoes, your budget that these gentlemen have been talking to us about would not be very pretty without it, that's something you might consider putting a little bit of extra padding on. When you are talking to your county office about signing up for coverage, we have all of these calculators that we can do. We can calculate what your premium would be based on what you're estimating that you would plant. Basically, your premium has a specific factor that has to do with how many acres you plant. So if you planted 2 acres of carrots with buy-up coverage, your premium is going to be smaller than if you planted 4 acres of carrots with buy-up coverage. But that's the neat thing at the beginning of the year. You might not know how much you're planting, and you can say, I want buy-up coverage. If you don't plant anything, you don't have to pay the premium because there's nothing to cover. We can also give you specific information on what the prices look like. So if you want to know what that average market price is to see if going for 100% of the market price would make a big difference for you versus getting 55% of that price at the beginning. So there are ways that you can sit down in your county office and crunch the numbers specifically. Now, Lisa, I was going to talk a little bit more about NAP specifically, but I don't want to run too far into time. If it's more useful to talk more about like the coverage levels and the budgeting, what works for you?
You're still ahead of the schedule that I allotted to you, but why don't we, since we'll take a pause and
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Great.
Just because there have been a couple things. First off, a couple questions just for you that came into the chat. And Vern shared the form to self-certify for the free NAP if folks are interested. That's
Great.
in the chat.
Thank
Questions.
While they're waiting, Bailey, can you
There you
see
go.
those market prices anywhere so people know what their
Yeah.
coverage is?
So absolutely. That is something that we could, like I said, do through the county office. It is it's public knowledge. You're able to get it, but it's a little bit convoluted of a website. So I would recommend that someone come in and talk with your county office staff or send an email and we can get it to you. What I can show you on the screen really quickly what it looks like. I'm globbing on to Jim's carrots for some reason. They're my example crop today. So if we're talking regular hybrid carrots in Massachusetts, can you see my screen if I do that? No. Okay, hang on. You can see we have a whole, it's called the National Crop Table. And what you would see is our average market price right now per pound, our unit of measure is pounds, per pound is $2.07, essentially. What that means is if you buy full boat buy up coverage 100%, you're going to get that whole amount. If not, you're going to get 55% of $2, which is to say it's never going to be as good as obviously we want it to be, but it's not too terrible. There's also a new consideration this year that if you're an organic grower, if you're certified organic, our market pricing reflects that. So it would be $2. It would essentially be $3 a pound for your carrots. And then we also have a direct market price that you have to get buy-up coverage to be able to use that price. But that's if you sell direct to consumer. If you're not doing wholesale for any of your crops, we know there's a different labor and input and everything we've talked about breakdown that goes into that. And so there is a higher price reflected there. So that's to say that's my example here of how we know what the prices are per crop. And that's something that could be provided at any time.
Thank you, Bailey. And Stephen, I think you are unmuted if you want to ask a couple
Hi,
questions.
Bailey.
Hi there.
I just had a couple questions. One, how does it work when you're doing succession planting? So, like when you set up your policy at the beginning, you just have to lay all that out, what you're planting on each plot over the season?
Not when that's a great question. Thank you. And I didn't get to that with the process yet. So you secure NAP coverage for these mostly annually tilled crops by March 15th of the year. And that's just when you say, I want to cover these 10 crops because, once you hit 3 crops, everything's the same. So if you think you might grow pumpkins and strawberries and eggplant this year, but you're not sure, add them on there in March. It doesn't matter. When we do your acreage reporting in July, that's due by July 15th. That's when we're going to get on record what you've actually planted and how much. So if you're doing buy-up coverage, you won't know your premium exactly when you sign up. When you finally come back to us and say, all right, I've planted all of my carrots, it came out to 2.4 acres. That's when I calculate your premium and we know what you owe. You have till January of the following year to pay that premium back. So hopefully you have a really great season and you don't need NAP on your carrots and you're able to, just pay that premium back after the season goes. But that's a great question. When you're signing up for coverage, you don't need to know how much you're going to grow. You just need to basically cover anything that you might want to have covered.
Okay, great. Thank you. And my other question is, what are you seeing in terms of the percentage of NAP eligible farmers actually getting policies, and like kind of what are you seeing as the sort of ideal type of farm that's actually going for this so that we can better suggest it to farms that are going to be likely to be like, oh yeah, that's for me?
So it's going to sound biased, but my unbiased answer is anyone who is historically underserved, anybody that can get free NAP coverage, I suggest should. So that doesn't matter if you're 100 teeny little crops or you really just focus on onions and tomatoes. If you can have it, get that safety net on there. After that, one of the biggest stop gaps or challenges that people find with NAP is the record keeping. So we do ask for your reporting of your acreage. That's a requirement for NAP. And then on the back end, you're required to report your production of your NAP covered crops. The reason for that is because we build a personal yield essentially for you. So if you're a really good carrot grower, Jim's carrots have been great for years and years and years. He is going to have a better yield number than the county average yield, meaning when he has a loss, he's going to see a bigger margin between what he expected and what came out. And so he's going to get a bigger payment. So I can explain that much more in depth with anyone connect with me on the other side. But what I mean by that is, so you have to tell me when you planted your carrots. You have to tell me afterwards how many carrots you harvested, yada, yada, yada. So sometimes I find that very small diversified farms struggle with having the records for every single crop that they have. If you find, like I said, you have 3 or 4 or 5 cash crops that you would be willing to keep the records for on the front end and the back end, NAP can be worth your while.
Okay.
Speaking to a very highly small scale diversified farm, the risk management agency whole farm revenue program that Lisa did talk about quickly. I have a slide for them. They are our sister agency, risk management agency, and they offer whole farm revenue protection, which they say are designed to meet the needs of highly diversified small scale farms in the way that they provide a risk management safety net for all commodities under the farm under one policy. And your protection is based on your insured revenue. So if your farm doesn't meet the insured revenue level, that's when the insurance can kick in. And so the record keeping for that could be a little less onerous. You know, you're not keeping every single harvest of carrots that you did, but you are keeping track of the carrot revenue and the eggplant revenue at the end of the year. So with this whole farm revenue protection program, there is a version called the micro farm revenue protection program, and that's tailored for any farms with up to 350,000 in revenue from ag commodities, which is a lot of the folks, you know, that we're going to be talking to around here about these other risk management options. And so it is worth considering what your level of comfort with record keeping or with working with you know, crop insurance agents versus your county office is. But my long story short would be NAP is useful if you can keep specific crop level records, and the whole farm micro farm policy might be more useful at a revenue based tax format level.
Okay, and so there you just say this year I'm estimating I'll be making X number of dollars, and
that's
eventually
my
you back that
understanding.
up with your crop plan if you're
Yes,
making
so
a claim.
you insure your revenue level that you'd like to insure at, and there's different coverage level options for that revenue. And then what I've read, this one isn't my program, unfortunately. What I've read is you have to wait till the end of the tax year. And then when the tax revenue documents come back and you work with your crop insurance agent and everything is parceled out that way, that's when an insurance claim would be paid.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks,
Yes,
Bailey.
there's
That's
great,
helpful.
sorry.
I was
There's
just
great
saying that was
resources
helpful.
online,
Yeah, go ahead.
fact sheets and frequently asked questions. I can direct Lisa to where those are. And maybe at a next webinar, someone can come talk about that. But I do like to mention that it's out there and available for folks if NAP doesn't seem like the best course of action. We really just highly recommend some sort of safety net for you because you're working so hard and it's so variable. And if you can have a little support and if you can budget for it, it does make a deal of difference on the back end.
Great. Thank you so much. There are a couple other questions for you, but I want to back up we have about 5 minutes left. And Vern and others have done a good job of answering some of the questions that are already in the Q&A if you want to look at those, and I will summarize those for things that are helpful where there's links and stuff that we want to share. One more question for you, Bailey, right now though, is a question to share the link to the pricing page, I think, that you shared. So if you have that, I want to just drop that in the chat to everyone. Is that something that you can do, or is that not a shareable thing?
I will do that. It's it's in a much more cumbersome like giant Excel sheet for the public on pricing. So I would really recommend if you just hooked up with your county office and they can give it to you in a much more digestible way. But I'm not gatekeeping the information at all. So let me find it and I will drop the link. But if it's hard to decipher, let me know.
That's helpful. Jim, we have a question for you about a specific question. Have you got reviews on different winter storage crops for cost, and how long do you like to keep them?
I do keep costs. I do have information about how much it costs to produce my various winter crops. I get from the UMass vegetable management guide the information about how long to keep them And I find that when I stray from, when I attempt to keep things longer, it usually, I spend more time grading, regrading, grading and regrading, and then I lose any profitability that I might have seen. So overproducing so as to have a crop last a few extra months has not been a good opportunity for me.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. I guess the last few questions here are for you, Bailey. And if folks do have other questions, feel free to raise your hand or put things into the Q&A. And if we don't have time to answer them, we can at least get you answers and reply to the email that I'll send to everybody. Quick question, is deer damage included in a natural disaster?
Unfortunately not. Our losses for NAP and probably, as it said, for the risk management agency have to be weather-related natural disasters. Pests like deer, we can't really hook up to a weather loss, but if for some reason the aphids went crazy this year because it was so hot and wet and that's what they love the most, we might be able to tie that to a natural disaster event and say that that was a piece of it. But fortunately, the pesky deer are on their own.
Thank you. And another quick question, would crops grown on leased land be different than on land you own?
That's a great question. No. Whether you lease or own the land yourself, what needs to be known for NAP is that you have control of the crops and you take the risk in the crops. So that would be, if you're going to plant them and you're going to get the money or lose the money. All we need to know for leased land is either a copy of your lease, or we do have a form on our end that is signed by the leasee and the leaseor. So that would be the only difference, is just another form.
Wonderful. And then can loss due to disease, this is you, that you just said that you want to answer this. So can loss due to disease because of weather be linked, for example, pepper blight because of prolonged weather? We did just answer that. That's it. So yes is the answer to that question, if you can link it. Am I missing anything? There's one question about under NAP. So you had 4 fields with different winter squash varieties. One of the fields was delicata, and that was the only delicata. You had a complete loss of that because of Phytophthora, but the question is, would you get any insurance coverage since it's not under 50% of the overall winter squash? Thanks.
That is a fantastic question, and that's the age-old reason why NAP can get people real frustrated. But my answer is twofold. When you have crops with different varieties, sometimes NAP has what we call pay groups, and things can be considered different pay groups. So if butternut squash is in its own pay group from delicata squash, which I don't know off the top of my head if it is, but because it has a different payment rate or it has a different yield expected, that kind of thing, that would lead to different considerations. If they're all in the same pay group, you're correct that no, you would not hit the 50% threshold and it wouldn't kick in yet.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that answer. And I think we've gotten to all the things, but certainly reach out if we missed anything and we'll get you a follow-up. But that is us out of time. We're at 1:31, and I just really want to thank all of the people, the attendees who joined us today. And then a special thanks to our presenters, to Vern and to Jim and to Bailey. That was really a fantastic overview of the tools and how you use them, and then some of the protection tools that we have for your insurance options. So I hope you all found this useful, and that we see you again, maybe at one of our on-farm events this season. Oh, I'll say we do have a brief survey that when you close out, I think will pop up, and we'll also bother you with in an email afterwards. So just a couple questions, and if you would answer them, would be really helpful and mean a lot to us. But I think that is it. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Learned a lot. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.